afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to see so many of you in the room, so many names, so many familiar faces. Um, my name is Mario LaMothe. I'm an assistant professor of Black Studies and Anthropology at the University of Illinois, Chicago, along with my colleagues and co-organizers Christine Dunford in the School of Theater and Music and Lisa Freeman in English. I thank you for attending the Dance, Theater, and Performance Studies Working Group discussion, Chicago Theater in the Time of Pandemics. The group and the event are housed by UIC's Institute for the Humanities, and we are grateful to Mark Canuel and Linda Vera and the staff of the Institute for creating this space. Certainly our deepest thanks go to Coya Brownrigg, Chloe Johnston, Quenna, Lené Barrett, Sherilyn Bruce, Nina Danger, or Diane Danger, and Jorge Silva, who will facilitate our dialogue on the impact of the current intersecting pandemics on their craft and Chicago's theater strategies for bridging its past to its present and future. Before I give an overview of the working group, who we are, and introduce the panelists, I hope you join me in paying tribute to the long-standing occupants and caretakers of Chicago and its adjacent areas, the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi nations, and many other tribes such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox also call this area home. So in the chat box, I invite you to recognize the original indigenous populations of your current area of residence. And also considering today's topic, it's also fitting to acknowledge the diversity of folk who settled here in Chicago and wherever you are due to coerced or voluntary migration, and who are laboring to activate the change they want to see in their environment and improve their world and essentially our world. So the Dance, Theater, and Performance Studies Working Group, or DTAPS as we call it, as my colleagues and I call it, is an interdisciplinary group that convenes a series of workshops, reading discussions, and public presentations devoted to the study of theater, dance, and performance. Never that far removed from practice, dance, as you all know in this room for sure, but that dance, theater, and performance studies apply a theoretical and critical lens both to the art of theater making and to the performance practices of everyday life. To that end, the working group, its coordinators, and participants draw from a wide array of practices and scholarly disciplines to address such questions as: how do artists transform the world through performance? How does theater shape and reshape and orient and reorient our sense of history and human experience? How might everyday practices be viewed as performatives that contribute to the making of our everyday realities? How do dance, drama, and performance act as a lens through which to understand and investigate larger social, cultural, and political events and movements? So on to our brilliant panelists. Coya Brownrigg and Chloe Johnston will facilitate our dialogue. They are the co-authors of Ensemble Made Chicago, a guide to device theater. Buy it now, it's really good. I'm really enjoying it. Coya is Associate Dean of Curricular Development and Chair of Theater Studies at the Theater School at DePaul University. She is a co-founder of Teatro Luna and Artistic Director of Free Street Theater. Chloe is an Associate Professor of Theater at Lake Forest College and former ensemble member of the Neo-Futurists. Sherilyn Bruce has performed on stages across the country as well as in Europe and Mexico, and created the role of Elizabeth Sandry for Steppenwolf's Tony Award-winning production of The Grapes of Wrath, adapted and directed by Frank Galati for Broadway's Court Theater, Britain's National Theater, and La Jolla Playhouse. In 2016, she played the role of Hillary in Lucas Hunt, Hillary and Clinton. I bet I butchered that name, and workshopped and performed in The Compass. Cheryl's list of theatrical credits, awards, and residencies is long and prestigious. So Nina Danger is a gallery director of Prop Theater and an artistic associate of Pop Magic Productions and The Plagiarist. Nina is a world builder and performer working largely in production design, set detailing, prop building, interactive immersion, puppetry, and activism. Moonlighting as Nina Nightingale, Danger is one of fewer than 100 silhouette portrait artists in the world, and host of Nina Nightingale Charm School, presented by Atlas Obscura. Jorge Silva is a writer, performer, producer, and the managing director for the Neo-Futurists. Silva was previously the producing coordinator for the Goodman Theater, serving as the producing liaison for community engagement projects and the curator for artistic programming. He earned a dual degree in government and theater at Cornell University's College of Arts and Sciences. An artistic affiliate with Teatro Travieso, Silva has also had extended stints with Dog and Pony DC and Smithsonian's Institutions Discovery Theater. Recognitions include nominations for a Chicago Latino Network Award and several Alliance for Latinx Theater Artist of Chicago Award. Again, long list of credits and equally prestigious. Quenna Lené Barrett is an actress, director, and theater educator who develops programs that amplify teen and community voices and hold space to tell and change the stories of their lives. She is a company member of ICAH's For Youth Inquiry Company, associate artist with Pivot Arts, serves as the Associate Director of Education at the Goodman, and is currently pursuing an EDD in Educational Theater at NYU Steinhardt. And now I will place this virtual space in the great care of Coya and Chloe.
Hi, friends. Thank you all for being here with us today. We're going to activate the chat first because we want the chat to be hopping through this whole thing. Yes, we have an esteemed panelist, but we also have an esteemed audience, and we want to all be talking to each other the whole time. So go ahead and tell us in the chat, boom, 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 where you are right now. Just where are you joining us from? I know that some of you, thank you, were shouting out the indigenous lands, and now it is fine to say I am in my living room in, Humboldt Park or wherever you are, from the kitchen. Yeah, I love the specificity. What a moment where like our private homes are suddenly our public places. So great. Thank you, Quenna, Chatham, Pilsen, Logan Square, Oak Park, Hyde Park. I'm reading like every fifth because you guys have those chat fingers going. I love it. Puerto Rico, Humboldt Park, Chicago Woodlawn, yes, Urbana, of all places, Urbana, Illinois. Awesome. So keep this going. I see Seattle, Washington. I'm curious, would you have been able, or would you have joined this conversation if it weren't on Zoom? So you can just give that a yes, no, maybe. Like personally, the chances that I leave my house to go anywhere if I don't have to were very slim, even before the pandemic. I'm seeing a lot of yes, some no's, some maybes, absolutely, it's probably not. Would you have been able to? So there's, I think, two questions here. Would you have, all things considered, or would you have been able to? Like those of you who are in Seattle, Puerto Rico, Urbana, would you have commuted to Chicago to participate in this conversation, right? You wouldn't have been able to geographically. Yes, great. So I love this mix of it. I think a lot of times when we talk about the way the pandemic in particular has impacted theater, we speak of it with such loss, which of course I understand why that is, but also I think it's so important to lean into the possibility, the way that we could find ways to be together across spaces through Zoom. So happy that you all are here with us. All right, so we're gonna just keep this chat hopping for a minute before we jump into the conversation. Okay, so let us imagine ourselves before we imagine ourselves, what is the most interesting performance you have encountered since March, like during this pandemic time? What is the most interesting performance? And remember, this is dance, theater studies, theater and performance studies, so we can take a broad view on what a performance is. Like I like to spy on my neighbors through the window because they have a really turbulent love life. That's the best telenovela I've ever seen in my life. So go ahead and pop it in the chat. What's the best performance that you've seen? And it could be a play proper. It could be, yes, your daughter's TikTok video dance creations. What else? Keep it coming.
And I'll throw in there too, just because I always want to see more good performance. Like if you have a link, even if it's just a link to more information about it, or somebody that's doing something amazing that we should know about, go ahead and stick that in the chat too.
It's in the race. 2020, yes. Student adaptations of poems, CPS creating an acronym. Yeah, these like CPS kids have been popping out the good stuff. Immersive scent experience by Mail. Stop motion Lego movies. What else we got? Great. Yes, we got a nice view. The Mother's Play, that was beautiful. Great. Yeah, what are the best performances you've seen? Great. Oh, yeah. Great. All right, so you can keep dropping those. We're going to give you one more question for the chat, and then I promise we're going to move into conversation with our panelists. Let us move into imagining our beautiful futures. So we are past the pandemic times. We are back into liveness with each other. What's the dream performance? Like, what event or performance are you going to go see? And it doesn't have to exist. You don't have to be like checking out the slate. You can just be like, what I want is a puppet play made out of garbage found in an alley, put on by a theater company that doesn't exist yet because it's all like 9-year-olds who went through an awesome CPS program and decided to start an avant-garde theater troupe. Like, whatever your beautiful future is, what are you going to see? Great. Yeah, some people are jonesing to get back into a tiny storefront theater, more French theater shows, a Bunraku version of a play currently in development, big outdoor feast. Oh, yes. Regina, I love this. The performance of just and equitable leadership from the federal government. Yes. I want that.
It. We're going to speak these things into existence. So, you know, put them in the chat.
Yeah. If one of the things the theater can help us do is imagine and cultivate and enact, that's the top of our list, right? Great. Singing of gathered friends and family. Yes. Participatory theater on regional main stages. Excellent. And you know what? If it's just taking you a moment to think of these, you can keep it coming. Because one of the fun things for some people on Zoom is that you could simultaneously read the chat and listen to the speakers. And we won't be offended that you're reading along with listening. All right, friends. So I would love to invite all of our panelists. We heard your bios, but could you give us the like quick 30-second version of what's most important to you about your many practices? Like if you describe yourself in an elevator pitch, what do you have to tell us? We'll start with Quenna. She happens to be right below me in this Zoom, and then Quenna, you just tag the next panelist. Sound good?
Great / awful. I think I'm gonna lean into the participatory performance since Tasia just lifted that in the chat. I love to devise. That's what I do with ensembles, but particularly thinking about calls to action within our pieces. And so that's my quick elevator speech. Jorge.
Thank you for making me next. I feel like the first thing I got to do is like everything comes through the lens of identity for me. So I'm gonna go with Boliviano, Mexicano, Indigenous, Southsider, Chicagoan, who does writing and performing, playing the role of a lifetime as a managing director. I'm gonna go with Chloe if I can.
Oh gosh. I didn't think about saying anything about myself. I'm also, oh gosh, Coya, you go and then I'll come back to me. Sorry, I got thrown for a second.
Sure. I'm also like Quenna, a deviser, create all of my work, co-created with my various participants, but I'm also an educator, an activist, and I do think of arts administration, I'm with Jorge, as like a really important part of my craft of like, how do we reshape not just our artistic work, but the experience of work and labor in the theater for everybody. I'm like aching for a radical reimagination of how we work together, not just what work we make. Chloe, did I buy you time or should I tag someone else?
No. You bought me time. I mean, I also consider myself a deviser, and somebody who also wants to like write and elevate really interesting work write about and elevate really interesting work that's out there already and help it get to a wider audience. And I've been thinking a lot about teaching and my responsibility as a teacher these days with this generation of young artists that are going to be out in the world, and really my hope for the post-pandemic world is that, and this extends beyond theater, is that we really think about putting caretaking at the center of our lives and maybe even the center of our economy. And so I think about like how to integrate that into theatrical practice and how to recognize where it also exists and how to teach my students to center that. Let's see, Nina?
Hello. I guess I would describe my practice as being very centered in immersive interaction, as I have now said already twice in the chat. It's my passion to like kind of use theater as a way of creating safe spaces for intimacy, and using that to talk about stuff that we don't always talk about. I think that theater is the way that we do that, to bring new ideas to people and to like talk about things that are difficult. And immersive interactive theater is a way to really put people into new environments that are safe for them to explore those ideas. And so my job is to create worlds that actors and audiences can do that in. Who has not gone? Is there anybody else I need to tag?
Cheryl then.
Cheryl.
Cheryl, please.
Thank you. From 1995 to 2007, I helmed a summer program for boys and girls in the Dearborn Homes housing development. And I worked with Tiffany Trent and Chloe Johnston. That's how I met Chloe. And it was a Goodman Theater initiative. And after it closed down in 2007, I reflected, and I still do, on the impact that theater initiative had on not only the boys and girls who participated, because we worked with kids from 10 to 16, but the long-lasting impact I think it had on the community, because I wrote a play that I directed for the participants, but we were together for 6 weeks, and over that time I came to know the students and know their families, and sometimes and oftentimes their home situations, and crafted usually the play around something that was happening or I was seeing happen, or something that I thought would instigate conversations among the kids. And it fed me in a way I had not anticipated. And I could also see that it fed the kids. And then one time, maybe 10 years, maybe 10 years after the program was over, I was getting gas at a gas station near where our program had happened. And two young men got out of a car behind me. And at first, I wasn't quite sure what was going on because one of them approached me and he said, "Are you Miss Cheryl? Did you used to run a summer program?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, I was in it. And he still remembered the lunches and the performance. And I remember meeting one of the students later who said that they wished that their child could go to the program. And that taught me something about what I thought I was doing and what must have been happening that I hadn't gone in the project thinking of. And I don't think there has been anything like that for that neighborhood. And I feel responsible in a way to that neighborhood because I live in Bronzeville and the program was in Bronzeville. So it made me understand the therapeutic aspect to creating theater and what a successful production means. And I mean success in a lot of different ways. Some kids had never been in a show. Some people had never seen a live performance. And it was a free performance open to the community. And so I want to do something like that again. But that was a lot of work and I couldn't do it alone. So I don't see how I can recreate that. But I learned a lot more than I ever could alone.
Oh, it's so nice to think about that program. Thank you for talking about that. That was an incredible thing. Yeah. And a beautiful example of theater being responsive to a need that it sees in a community. And I would love to hear from everybody. Maybe our audience can answer this question in the chat, and I'll throw the question to some of our panelists to answer out loud while we're writing in the chat. But I'd love to hear how in your own life you yourself are responding to sort of the dual issues of how COVID is affecting theater and also how we want to be responsive to the social uprisings that have been happening over the last few months as well. And so, again, I'd love to hear from the audience in the chat, like how is your own practice changing? How are the theaters where you work changing? And then I'd love to throw it to some of the panelists as well. Let's see, Jorge, do you want to kick this off?
Sure. I mean, you're wondering about personally, and I think that's the tough part, because personally, being so close to downtown and seeing the demonstrations be so close, my own experience with the Chicago police growing up in this city, those are all things that are prevalent in every way, shape, or form. And then my wife is an allied health worker, so for us, it's not a question of if we're going to get coronavirus; it's a matter of when at this point. And that's just something that we have to settle with. And so though it's ever present, so there's nothing that for me that I can ever escape from. There's no path for me to say that it's not present in any way, shape, or form. And it's like I said before, I'm playing the role of a managing director, and so for that, in that way, there's a lot of reliance in my direction as a member of leadership to try to support the people who are in our immediate orbit, the people whose livelihoods are at stake, who are facing the same stresses that I am. And so I think that's steeled me in a certain way to be able to continue supporting those that are currently reliant on either the company or just me directly, family included, because I still have to take care of my family. So the theater that, the neo-futurists, being nimble, creating shows every week, has provided a lot of catharsis for me personally, because I started as a super fan of the company, then became an artist of color scholar, then became a designer and a consultant, et cetera, before becoming managing director. So being able to see the artists create has helped me also process and help ground me in a very unique and special way in this moment. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yeah, and what are some of the specific changes, maybe within your institution, that you've made in response to the pandemic and to the larger social movement?
Yeah, so the neo-futurists, in a matter of a week and a half, pivoted the flagship show, The Infinite Wrench, to become digital, so that we redubbed it The Infinite Wrench Goes Viral because we're funny like that, but also so that we can continue the ongoing tradition of being nonstop and ever changing. Um, what was beautiful was to see how everybody came together to create that whole new process, that whole new structure, to be able to create digitally and remotely, and still engage the aesthetic in these brand new ways, and has fed us and sustained us both economically and spiritually. Because I think, we often forget about what we're doing spiritually along these paths. Um, and we've expanded as a result into education, online education programs, to community service programming, to full-length films, and now to albums. Now we're producing albums. I never thought I would be a music producer, but here I am, and that's the oddity of it all, is that everybody has kind of had to flip their mindset and their skill sets. So that before I was running a theater company, now I'm just organizing people in a digital media company. And that's as far as the neo-futurist. I also work for Daniel Murphy Scholarship Fund, which is an education institution, and we've had to really change the way that we support our students, because some of them are boarding school students, some of them are Chicago public school students, some of them are private school students within the city. And what that means is there's all kinds of different needs and challenges for some of them being forced to be home, and trying to maneuver and fill the digital gap, which is that some of our students just don't have internet bandwidth at home to be able to participate in classes, don't have a space at home to be able to sit with their laptop quietly for school, and some of them have responsibilities that are greater, where they're part of supporting the family actively. And so those are the big changes that we've had to try to commit to, which is not going into our offices at Daniel Murphy, but also being that much more involved in everybody's lives in a minuscule fashion, where before it was just at a distance and we were there to support, but now we have to be actively involved to be supportive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing some great responses in the chat as well, as from students and from educators. I would love to hear more too, from all of those groups, about how their lens has changed. Quenna, I'd love to hear from you as well. You work with schools and theaters, neither of which are very busy places right now. Or they're very busy, but people are not in them.
Certainly, yeah, but busy here in the.
Yeah.
I'll start talking sort of in the institution space that I work in, and then I can talk more about my personal practice beyond that. But I've really seen, I work in the education department at the Goodman, and I've been there about 2 years. Was able to work with Jorge before he left to fulfill this role. And, I think that that institution is really trying to be responsive, right, to the demands of this moment, in a way that it was surprising to me. And I've only been there 2 years, but we created these working groups once, and I can't remember if those. We had started to do some work before the demands came down, but once they came out, they really began to sort of guide how those groups were working. And so, we were organized under different buckets. One, outreach, what does it mean? How are we engaging with new and more diverse communities in a way that is not just about exchange or about getting butts in seats, but really about relationship building. And just a number of initiatives that I think will lead to something really positive and fruitful. I know one program that has come directly out of those working groups is the Future Labs project, which just got announced, right? And so that is inviting playwrights of color to submit work. And it's not being curated by the typical folks who would curate that, right? So it's not being housed within the artistic department. The evaluation team for that will be folks from across the theater at different levels. And so that is really exciting to me. And it's like that team will be primarily made up of folks of color, right? And so the way that we're evaluating that is a way that would not have happened, I don't think, had not this moment occurred. And so I'm really excited for things like that to continue and to come out of those kinds of spaces. In my personal practice, lots of identities that I didn't list, but I do also sort of consider myself an organizer, and that a lot of my work is based in that sort of tradition, and particularly, right, sort of the young Black organizers that have been active in Chicago for the last several years, right? Before this summer, before the uprisings this summer, like we were out there 4 years ago, right? Sort of in a similar vein. And for me, my personal practice has always been about sort of bringing those questions into the theatrical space. And so in this moment, virtually, right, I've been able to sort of continue to explore that. I worked on a project that closed just a couple weeks ago. Free Street Theater was one of the producing partners, called Rewriting the Declaration, right? And so it really asked this question, what would it look like, right, if queer folks of color were at the table, right, originally sort of guiding us or creating something that would guide us, right? The main sort of problem being addressed is that we're in this predicament that we're in today is because like we weren't at the table, right? And so what does it mean if we begin to sort of, first of all, like, what is a table? Like, why do we need a table, right? And so asking all of these questions, and I was able to do that with this like awesome company of artists from across Chicago and New York, right, which would not have been able to happen in person. And so I think just I myself have just been trying to like continue to respond, to take the time to reflect on like what's actually happening, what are the questions that are being asked, what are the questions that aren't being asked, and how can we continue to do that in this moment.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Nina, I want to hear you chime in as well, especially since you work as a freelance artist. So I think our freelance designers are like the secret weapon in the theater because they work with everybody and they know everything and they work with such a variety of different kinds of institutions. So I'd love to hear your perspective about how your work is changing.
Well, honestly, it's been really interesting to me because I'm finding that a lot of theater companies are truly getting more creative, or maybe the ones that are getting more creative are the ones that are calling me. You know, and it's been really great, you know, to see. Okay, well, this is our roadblock, right? And as you know, freelancers and as theater people and as people of color and as queer people, we're used to being told no. We're used to being told you can't do this, or you don't have access, or you don't have funding. So this was just another thing of like, well, now you can't do it together. What are you going to do? You know? And so a lot of the companies that I've had, you know, the luck to work with, have been like, okay, this is just another roadblock. How are we going to address it? How are we going to continue to create something that touches audiences? That brings, how do we bring theater into people's homes? How do we make people want to engage, you know, digitally when they're sick of being on Zoom, when they don't want to do this? And so we started, you know, different shows that I've been working on, you know, found ways to like include the audience so that, you know, we're doing a lot of interactive stuff where it's like, okay, what the audience is choosing kind of affects what the play looks like, you know, in a sort of like choose your own adventure kind of way, or like how do we get them packages mailed to their houses so they have something in their hands that they can interact with that goes with the show? How do we continue to like evolve it? And to me, that just, it's sort of both on the designer side of things and also on the audience side of things. There's this whole world of accessibility that we haven't been talking about. And something that, I guess we addressed at the top of this conversation was like how many of you in the audience couldn't have even been here today. It's the same sort of thing. And on the designer's end, I spend, prior to the pandemic, I spent most of my life in commute, running from one production meeting to another across town. I don't have a car, which is crazy for a designer. So it's, me on the train and then going across to another place. And, being able to do all of my production meetings via Zoom, I am more focused. I am more present. I am more able to be prepared for it because I'm not spending my time, going here to here and, spending money getting to different places and, all of that organization. And there are a lot of designers with accessibility needs who often get left out, who don't even apply for jobs because they're like, oh, it's at that theater that doesn't have, doesn't have ramps or doesn't have an elevator access. I can't work for them, or I can't, And so it's been really great getting to work with some new designers who, otherwise just didn't see themselves even having an opportunity. I know that's a little bit of like a silver lining side of things. But I've been kind of encouraged to see where the like accessibility and creativity has come out of everything. It's pushed us, I think, in a lot of ways.
Thank you. I'm nodding vigorously. Yeah. And I see that with my students as well, that there's things that they're able to do now, and they're around the world because we don't have students on campus, and things that they're able to access that they wouldn't be able to. Yeah.
Right. I'm working with people in New York and LA at the moment, which I would not have had those opportunities to do before. So.
Koya, do you have a follow-up about this?
A follow-up question to this?
Yeah, or anything, because I have some questions ready to go, but I haven't heard your voice in a while.
Well, I was thinking about the same question from my own perspective, which is like people ask us this question at Free Street all the time, like what's changed since the pandemic? And I'm like, well, some stuff has changed radically, but less than you might think, and particularly around the kind of like movement for racial justice that we've seen kind of go mainstream. I don't even say, I was like, I think Quenna pointed out really importantly that Chicago has been a home for like really, really concerted activism around questions of abolition and police violence and sort of disproportionate distribution of funds for the arts and other arts are not school and mental health clinics are not amenities per se, but like we know all that's wealth concentrates on the northeast side of the city, and I'm like often a like one note pony when it comes to these things, and Free Street has been talking about this stuff for years now. Since I became artistic director, has really been at the heart of our programming, is really thinking about how do we partner with racial and economic justice movements, and we're explicitly an abolitionist organization. And like, for example, we had a robbery in our storefront space over the weekend, and in order to make an insurance claim, we have to call the police. And I'm like, well, we're not calling the police. She's like, well, we can't make an insurance claim. Not that she's advocating for calling the police, but these are like really normal conversations for us to be having at Free Street. At the same time, we're not going to call the police. Just so you know, we're just going to swallow that money, like we'll find it somewhere. But a lot of like our communities are hurting so bad, and like, we called our landlady about that, and she was talking about like just everyone on our block. This is our space in back of the yards who has COVID, like people we know by name. The stuff that got stolen is that we were working with Alt Chicago to turn the front of our theater space into a grab and go food pantry. We did a like come in and get food pantry over the summer, but that's not sustainable in our current climate, but we still wanted to be able to serve our communities. And I'm not always sure that's through the arts right now, of like, how do we bring our sense of creativity and imagination and nimbleness and design? Like, how do we design processes that are not about putting on a show or a story, but are about activating with and in our communities, so that's where we've been. But I do miss like organizing on the ground. Free Street doesn't have a marketing budget that pays for ads. We have a marketing budget that pays for people to literally knock on doors and invite our neighbors to see our shows, or to come see the play. We always pay people over things. Like Nina's worked for us too, so we're like, can we recycle that tin can? Like we'd rather like put our, our resources elsewhere, and at the same time, it's like, I worry a lot that the nets that we're putting out to save the arts are going to continue to disenfranchise the very same people that have always been disenfranchised. And I worry that in a moment of precarity, organizations that are white run and mostly serving white audiences are going to decide to save themselves instead of continuing this coexisting effort to redistribute. Does that make sense? And so like, I just find myself like anxious all the time about like, what does it mean to be an artist right now? What does it mean to be an administrator right now? And how can we use this as a kind of tectonic shift that redistributes everything when we come back? It's probably too lofty a goal to redistribute everything, like a race against this vaccine, but that's kind of how I feel. I know that was a long answer. And Sherilyn, I know we didn't hear from you on this question, so I don't know if that we can launch into, what do you think about all that?
Well, I was thinking that if I was running youth drama workshop today, would the boys and girls be able to participate on a laptop if we couldn't work together? Because given COVID restrictions, would it be safe to work together? And to be honest, that was the most fruitful time, spending time together with kids, hearing their conversations, whether they know you're listening or not, and understanding that information informs the kind of work you're going to do. The program, and I'm going to keep talking about that because that was really a successful effort, I think, in a lot of ways. The program at the close gave students a stipend, which in their minds they computed to pay, but it was a stipend for successful completion of the program based on participation and attendance. And I explained that they would receive a check with their name on it, not their parents' name. And I explained that when they got their check, they would have to sign it. And we found out that some of the kids could not write in cursive. They could only print. So part of the program, we tacked on an extra 20 minutes at the end of the day to teach them how to write their name so that when they got their check at the end of the program, they could sign it, and to explain that they shouldn't sign it in pencil because, it was a check, and all kinds of things that the boys and girls had no understanding of. So the program was teaching us what to teach them, but we could only learn that by being with them. And so knowing that to recreate that situation, they'd all have to have access to a laptop, which, the public schools realized everybody didn't have. And many people I didn't know at the time were forced to go to the libraries, but now I don't even know if you can do that. So many things are up in the air. So that means for technical reasons and health reasons, the kinds of programs that benefit the populations I'm interested in can't happen. It seems to be a thwarted effort. So again, those boys and girls may not have theater or the experience of making theater, which we all know feeds a lot of needs. It's not about becoming an actor. It's really not.
Sherilyn, this also makes me think, though, and this might be a question for anyone on the panel who wants to jump in, is that I do think we're a little bit in the mode it's sometimes of thinking of what can't happen, as opposed to what we do so well in the theaters. How could this happen? Like, how can we, you know, so like at Free Street, for example, we took technology to all of the young people who work in our programs, because we're like, if this is how we're going to convene, this is how we're going to convene. And I'm wondering,
you gave them laptops?
Anything they needed. A phone, a laptop, a camera equipment, lights. Like, we were dropping off care packages all over the city, and we pulled our production budget to do that, you know, like, because that's like, so it's like this question of like, and, you know, I'm so curious of like how we begin to imagine the how, you know, of like, what could we be doing? And I would love to like put the brain trust of this panel and our awesome audience, like, what could we be doing? Like, another thing I've been wishing for, and I wish I was like a fancy administrator, not just like a artistic director at a small theater company, of like this moment where CPS students are at home, right? And they're not going to the schools. We could have seized this moment for a radical redistribution of artists and teachers across the city. Like, who lives where, and how do we create like block to block servicing in these communities, as opposed to like, well, like my school an hour away from me, or like that we have like just there's so much we could have reimagined right now that I don't know that. I think some of us have reimagined it, and I'm curious about that. And I'm also curious about what we could dream together about, like, what we think we could do with our great gifts to change things. It's like a big question. I'm like, someone make me feel more hopeful, please. Anyone?
Well, I just also want to note that like there's a commonality in these different projects that are being described, which is just acknowledging the reality of real people's real lives. That I think, you know, for many of us, like when we were trained to be artists, or when we learned about what it would mean to be an actor, it was sort of like you walk into a rehearsal room and you're just an artist. You like leave everything behind and you're just focused on this. And of course, that was always a lie. And being under duress in various ways has revealed that lie. And so when I hear about work, you know, that's done in the past and that's being done right now, that really just says, okay, who are you? What are you doing? Like, what is the reality of your life? What are you struggling with? And let's start from there. Let's start by acknowledging the truth. That I would love to see us carry that into the post-pandemic world. And in all theaters, big and small.
Is it only the panelists speaking, or everybody?
Talk.
Michelle, you're speaking now. Let's hear from you.
Okay. So I'm really excited to hear a possible shift from making art for consumption to making art for nourishment of the people in the communities that are making the art. And what I'm seeing with the CPS kids, we've got some artists in the schools that are supported with grants. It's really, really hard to make it work now, you know, during the pandemic. But the kids are so hungry for it, and they're so eager, and it's so life affirming to be able to use the whole self, the whole person, the spirit and the mind and the storytelling and the movement, to be engaged with learning and understanding the world from an artistic center. It's just, it's a really big shift. That's exciting for me. Over.
Coya, I'm really trying to think about what you just said about this radical reframing moment and what has to happen. And I know you're entrusting this group to say, like, well, how does this happen? How do we do it? And I think there's a part of me that's extremely cynical. And it probably comes from a life experience that says prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I think the underlying thought that I think we're both trying to get to in this conversation is that the theatrical model needs to change. It's been begging to change for a long, long time. Just from a business point of view, as a nonprofit model, that so many regional theaters, equity, non-equity, have been in this mode of relying almost entirely on individual contributions was not financially sustainable. And because of it, it bleeds into priorities and morals and ethics of an individual theater company, or arts organizations at large. And I think some of the proof of that exists following the 2016 election. Right after the 2016 election, we saw individual contributions and ticket sales plummet because people, for the first time, were paying more attention to politics. I say people, but a lot of theater goers, for example, were given for the first time to ACLU and Planned Parenthood, which is fantastic. And then I saw the same thing happen in the middle of the summer, where rightfully so, a lot of audiences were paying more attention to the demonstrations that are occurring over the summer, and then watching individual contributions and ticket sales go down. And what that shows is that there's a decision making that happens when people are trying to engage, and that's either they're giving to their arts organization or they're giving to the community service organization. And that's a problem in and of itself. The arts model needs to change so that those are one in the same across the board, so that decision never has to happen, that when they're giving to an arts organization, they're giving to a community service organization. And I think in that way, if that is to happen, the sort of thing of redistributing artists, for example, is possible, because then those priorities are one and the same.
Yeah, I also was thinking, sort of as Coya was talking about, right, like what can we as artists and as the organizations of theater borrow from mutual aid, right, projects, and how can that become a part of our work, right? Like, I think absolutely. I heard so many people say the exact thing that you said, Coya, about like connecting artists like hyper locally to the young people in their communities. But like, why didn't that happen, right? Like, who do we need to go to? Like, who has the funds? Who has the resources? Or like, do we just get a bunch of people and say, hey, let's organize some stuff, right? And perhaps people have been doing that, and like, we just don't know. I myself tried to organize what I was terming the political theater project over the summer, or it was starting to get cold, and I think it was too late. But I got curious about, well, like, can we sort of take a theater troupe, right, and go and just do pop-up performances, distanced, right, like in parks, in neighborhoods, and asking these questions, right, really connecting the work that was happening on the ground, right, with the Black Abolitionist Network here in Chicago, right, like those questions, like, what does it mean to look like, what would it mean to defund the police, right, and like, how would those resources be reallocated, and just having those conversations, right, with people in a very public and distanced way. And so, I think that there are things that are possible. I also am thinking about, right, a lot of us are educators and have young folks that we're working with virtually. And I know there's this question of accessibility, but something that I really learned, I think, through this is like, forget the curriculum for a moment, right? If we need to, let's just pause. And again, like sort of Chloe said, just be people in space, like dealing with what's going on, and I think that that's okay. I think it's okay for us to pause and rest and to reflect, and to really sort of think about, well, what do we as humans need, right? And then from there, our art can continue. And that was something that we were able to do in our project. So there were several moments, and I think we just had to reimagine a rehearsal schedule, right? And so there was no way that we were going to be rehearsing this play for the typical rehearsal schedule on Zoom, right? So we'd like cut that down. We built in way more breaks. Tech was completely reimagined, right? And I think that would feel much more healthy to me, even like once we are able to resume in person. And so like, those are also the kinds of questions and reimaginings that I'm curious about, right? Like, what are those kinds of learnings that we can continue to move forward with?
And I want to like tag Nina into a conversation, like one of these questions of like, what do we say to people who say that art's role is to entertain, not be a social statement? And I think about like how much work could be both, you know, and like how it can be really like, even like to what Quenna is saying about like, how do we reimagine together? Like radical work doesn't have to be soulless, joyless, like no fun work. We know that activism and revolutions are not sustainable unless we love each other in joyful and fun ways, you know. And Nina, I think about your work as being like always, and I mean this with great love, delightful. Like I'm always like so happy about everything you make. And I'm wondering if you could sort of speak to like creating joyful spaces that are also politicized.
Well, I think that Free Street is really good at that, for one. You know, Free Street work tends to be that, right? Like, how can we educate people and talk about hard things while also, you know, exhibiting joy, because it is part of it, right? Like, we can't just be, you know, doom and gloom and serious all of the time, right? It's possible to be both, and that's something that I think everybody has been struggling with, even on a personal level, where you're like, oh, what am I allowed to post on social media right now? Am I allowed to be happy in this time period? You know, is that taking away from somebody, you know, something more important? And there's a lot of decisions going on about that. Related to everything that we've just been talking about, something that that you know, you guys were talking about the Free Street produced show that Quenna was talking about, where it's, you know, rewriting the Declaration, yes, or the Constitution, was it? Anyway, I feel like that's the same sort of thing here when we're talking about theater, and you know, who is theater for, and what is it that, you know, how are we serving our community? You know, if, like Jorge was saying, if we want to be seen as something that's not an excessive, you know, like a treat, right? Art isn't a treat. Art is like essential. If we want to be seen as an essential service, as something that is, you know, necessary as part of this revolution, then we really have to think about that. How are we serving the community with our art and the things that we're making? How is that furthering all of these revolutionary ideals that we're talking about? You know, everybody that we tend to work with, you know, has all of these other projects where we're working with organizers about, you know, and we're there in the streets protesting, and we're, you know, creating community mutual aid projects, right? So like, I think that part of it is like rewriting our idea of theater from the ground up, of like, how is it mutual aid? You know, how is this part of the community? And once we are there having that conversation with our audience, you know, like, what is it that the audience needs? What is it that you're taking from theater? You know, which I think was something that we talked about a lot at Prop Theater, was here we are, this little, like, you know, this storefront theater. Are we interacting with our neighbors? You know, we're this cool little, you know, space that a lot of people will, you know, we have producers coming in from other neighborhoods and producing here, but like, are we talking to our neighbors? Are we making it easy for our neighbors to come and do theater? And so one of the things that we did was, we were like, okay, how can we provide childcare during our shows? How can we you know, talk to the people around us and say like, hey, you know, like, what stories do you want us to be telling? How can we tell your stories? How can we bring in people from the community and have them be part of the devising process, so that it speaks specifically to the community that we're in, which was Avondale? You know, it's like, how do we connect with these people? Because we were having, you know, we were getting obviously like decent audience members, but they were coming from other neighborhoods. So we're like, we're missing everything that's happening right around us. We're going outside of our neighborhood. And so I think a lot of, especially small theaters, need to really think about that. Like, you know, of course, we're trying to draw in, you know, audience members from neighborhoods with money, you know, and we want more people, you know, to come in. But like, if we can be a hub, you know, very much like I feel, you know, Free Street tries to do, go into the neighborhoods with your work. But if you have a space, if you're lucky enough to have a space, like, how can you serve the people directly but around you? You know, and whether that means part of your space does become, you know, a pantry, or, you know, a space that's like open for protesters to get water or to use the restroom or to, you know, whatever that ends up being. Like how can you think about it as like the correct idea of like the church, right? If you think of theater as like this is a church building, of like that is a community building, of like how do we serve the people closest to us? I think
I
that's
think
going to lead us in that direction.
I think the key is to be part of the community, and that means knowing, talking to people who live there, because you're part of the theater. If you have a home base, you are part of the community. So it can't be prescriptive. Oh, I think this is what people need. They'll tell you. They will exactly tell you because they know, and that is where it comes from. And it's not that theater is prescriptive, but it certainly can raise questions, because if it isn't entertaining, nobody's going to see it. Nobody will want to see it. I can't endorse a show that I don't like, even if I worked on it. I can't sell it with a clean heart. And I look to play shows like for me, I enjoyed Sesame Street because it was funny and it was fun, and it was only teaching. I mean, it was teaching in every direction. And so for me, the challenge is how can it be entertaining and be substantive? And I think knowing what is entertaining makes it some substantive to the audience. And it can't be all things to all people. But I found that the most sincere endorsement, word of mouth, is such a ringing endorsement for production. When people see a show and they say, oh, you got to see this. That's better than any kind of car card or poster or something like that. When it spreads like wildfire and people can't wait to see it. That's the most powerful advertising, because it's first person. It's actually people giving witness to something. You really want to see this. I saw it and I took my mother back. I had to see it more than once. So it's important to know our neighbors and know what's on our neighbor's heart. And in some ways, it becomes applicable in maybe some small way to other communities. You know, it just does. You might not have crafted the work with that in mind, with immigrant communities in mind, but there's something they understand on another level from the work you did. And I also very much enjoy the work of Albany Park. David and Laura started that organization around the time we were doing youth drama workshop, and I was struck by how all those stories come out of those kids' families and experiences. Every single one of them. They don't do anything out the box like that. It comes from their experiences in their lives, which has been riveting, really. I still remember some of those shows I saw back in the 90s. Kids being homeless, and really graphically describing their experiences, which I thankfully don't know, but just, having to use a bucket for a bathroom and shuffling from buildings with a lot of stray people in them and all kind of stuff. I sat there transfixed. And that was those kids' lives, because that's the only way they do that. That's the only place those stories come from. And I was never not fed. Never not fed. I never went away hungry.
I think, Cheryl, what you're bringing up is, and we're hearing this also from Nina, from Quenna, from Jorge, of like this question of like, who are our communities and how do we be in service of them? And one of the sort of painful things about Chicago theater for me is thinking about, how segregated the resources are, and that if we have to leave our communities to work professionally as artists, then our artistic homes are not in our communities. And this is sort of a cycle that we're in all of the time of like, how do we think about who our communities are, you know, in terms of our artistic homes. So, you know, I think this is always like, again, I told you I was a one-note pony. I don't know if you can be a one-note pony. Friends, I want to make sure that we're getting to your questions and your thoughts. So I see Mario asking so please drop questions. If you're like, oh, yeah, panel, but you haven't talked about X, tell us, drop this question about X right here so we can get it in. We'll do some speed answering. But we have a question from Mario. What self-care and or anti-racist professionalization advice do you have in dialogue with your artistry or scholarship? So, you know, like as you're engaging in this hard work, how are you engaging in caretaking and trying to change your relationship in the profession? Is that a good rephrase of the question, Mario?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. And considering that we're also talking about past to future, and so there are folks here in the room that are, you know, trying to be more than emergent in the field. So yes, thinking about those folks.
Jorge, maybe I'll put you on the spot here.
Sure.
Sorry, you know, if somebody who's newly, you know, fairly newly performing the role of managing director, like
Sure.
how, and you know, you're from Chicago, you're watching these things, you're in your family is dealing with all of these issues. Like, how are you thinking about how this shapes the structures where you're working, and how are you caring for yourself and caring for others within that?
Well, certainly it's bringing in you to the question about structure. I think the thing that I'm the most grateful for in this current moment is that the Neo-Futurists are a horizontal organization, as in non-hierarchical. I think a lot of the questions that have come forward from movements like We See You White American Theater absolutely apply for everybody in some way, shape, or form. But I think a lot of them, we have our own unique problems as a result because we're non-hierarchical in that regard. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I think the other thing is that whenever we're trying to talk about something in this nature, either if it's personal or in the actual theatrical mode, is just remembering that activism actually costs something, right? And so whenever we see anything that is, you know, that looks like performative, ask yourself if it's costing you something. Because if it doesn't, then it's just performative activism. And like, that's an anxiety that I have about myself all of the time. Is like, is what I'm doing really contributing? Is it the right thing to do? And if the answer is that, if I ask myself, is it costing me something? And the answer is no, then I have work to do. And until I can say, yes, it's costing me something, then can I begin to relax a little bit. I also have to remind myself that I'm a brown person, I'm an indigenous person, right? And that there's a little forgiveness that has to come back my way as well, and a certain amount of patience. I love the fact that there's so many artists in so many spaces saying we need to do something. But who are you asking that of is the question, right? Because I have an active role in it, and yes, absolutely. But if you're asking of me to do the work for you, that's antithetical to the ethos of being an activist for racial justice in this moment. I could go for days, y'all, but I don't want to eat all the conversation pie. So please, somebody else have a slice.
I'll jump on that. So in a related but like slightly on the other side of this pie, if you will, I have been opening up my DMs for peer support conversations, specifically to white people who might be a little bit confused as to what's going on in this time and might have questions and might be trying to, you know, figure things out. And I have learned a lot by doing that, you know, just in terms of like, okay, well, what things do I hold in myself that need to be dismantled, right? What are the misconceptions or like misunderstandings of the movement? I don't even want to call it a movement, but you know what I mean? Like there are a lot of questions I think that people have and are scared to ask, and they do research and then they run into a lot of, you know, different opinions and a lot of different advice as to what they're supposed to be doing. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to put myself out there as a resource, and I'm going to set myself an amount of time that I'm going to allow this to be, taken advantage of, and I'm going to do my best to point people into the right directions to get the answers that they seek, right? And for me, that has been healing of friendships, has been healing of like professional relationships, things that relationships that I think could have been detrimental to a professional relationship. Like, I don't know if I can work with these people kind of conversations or things that I was having. And so opening myself up as a resource was sort of an act both of like vulnerability, but also self protection, right? Like I was like, I'm going to I have control. I control the bounds of this conversation as, the person who's offering the peer support. I can tell you, like, this is how long we're going to talk about this, and these are the things that I'm willing to talk about. But it allowed them to be talked about. So that was something that was super helpful for me on both of those accounts, self-care and radicalization.
Do any of the other panelists want to respond to that question about self-care?
I think I just sent a private chat note to you, Chloe, but I find that this the maelstrom of events has distracted me or kept me anxious and a bit on the back foot because there's so much to read, and I watch maybe too much news, and it has been disorienting, and I think I've struggled to focus. I can do short term. I can work on a project successfully, but I don't feel as productive as I would like to feel. And I didn't notice it at first because, like everybody else, I thought by fall everything would have been smoothed out. And we're currently seeing this tsunami of infections and deaths. That's actually frightening as I look at the television. At first I wasn't frightened, but then I found myself being a bit anxious watching the news, wondering if I should watch the news. And there was an article some months back by, I can't remember her profession, but it was an article in the Times that said you probably shouldn't read everything. You probably shouldn't keep up with the news. You don't need to know it. You don't need to be on point. In fact, just as you can consider what you consume in your diet, you should consider that to be as cautious with your news diet or information feed. And that was good counsel. I didn't always follow it, but that was good counsel. And I was grateful that person was prescient enough to say, put that, get off that webpage. Stop looking at the poll numbers, because it's not spiritually or psychologically helpful or healthful. I also wanted to say that I felt that during these months, more attention has been given to projects with focusing on or centering on social issues or current events, more so than I think in the past, or revisiting classics and torquing them so that they're more socially relevant now. And I feel sometimes I just want to be, I want to say it, I just want to be entertained. I want to be taken care of and have a good time and not feel guilty about that. And yeah, so I found myself thinking about that. Oh, one more thing about George Floyd. Oh, one more thing about Breonna Taylor. I hit a point. So I was, as an artist, looking for someone thinking like that. Because I know a lot of people were thinking about the other hard stuff. I was thinking about it. So I needed a break, and I was looking for a break.
Thank you. Quenna, I hope you won't mind me nudging you on this either, because you are like you've done like 40,000 shows since the pandemic started. But I'm also thinking about how your most recent rewriting the Declaration ended with such an invitation to joy and self-care. And so I'm wondering how you're thinking about that in the context of your activism and your work.
Yeah, I was going to say this jokingly, but in all earnestness, really like sort of taking the time to rest and pause. I take a nap every day after lunch. And it was hard to do that when I was doing multiple shows at once. And so like when I was able to do that, was refreshed again. But right, whatever that thing is for you to help you sort of ground and recenter, right? So that you can continue those difficult conversations. I think something that Jorge said, Nina, major props to you, but I let allies do the work. Like that is a boundary for me. But right, like when I rest, when I meditate, when I sort of gain all of my armor, I am better equipped to have those conversations when I need to have them. And you know, sort of being less afraid, right, and being unapologetic. And also professional when I do need to have those conversations has, you know, been helpful. But all of those practices really help. And then yes, like centering joy, centering play, right? I think those are self-care strategies. For me, I build that into any time that I'm working with an ensemble. That's how we start our processes. We check in, and this is true for my classroom spaces as well. And I think that these are like tools and strategies, right? So that you're continuing to check in and check out, you're building rituals, and that you are intentionally creating space for play. I'll lift this up again. This has some great resources with tons of games, right, to sort of continue to build that. And when we do that, right, we have the foundation to, again, be able to continue to have those difficult dialogues. And through play and humor and pleasure. Yeah.
I love that we've come back around to the things that we love. We started with performances that we love. I want to kick us back over to Mario, who's been a wonderful host putting this together. Mario, say something brilliant.
I'd like to hear from my colleague, Christine Dunford. I know you're here, Christine.
I am here. I'm soaking all this wisdom up, all this wisdom and experience up.
I mean, the last question also, I wonder about you and, you know, in the School of Theater and your students who are, you know, as part of our institution, a very minority serving institution. So is that question coming up, the idea of self-care and sort of radical sort of pedagogies?
These are the questions. It's the question. What I think all of the faculty, certainly a lot of our faculty are here right now, and we're talking every day about what we owe ourselves, what we owe our students, what we owe ourselves, what we owe the field, what we owe the world right now, and how we creatively adapt and use this moment, leverage this moment to do things that we couldn't do before. We're paying attention to what we're learning, that we can take into the future, even after this COVID moment is over. And we are very actively talking to each other, faculty and staff and students, about the world we're in and the world we're making as in our classes. And this is why we're so excited. Mario and I were talking with Lisa about what we wanted to talk about right now, who we wanted to convene, and we said we want to talk about now, and we can't talk about now without talking about the past and the future that we want. And so this is exactly what the students in my class that I teach and I are all talking with each other about, and what our faculty are talking with each other and with our students about. And some answers, some really great takeaways. I'm excited to I've been listing takeaways, like things I want to let go of and things I want to hold on to from this moment. And some of the things from today I'm taking away, like teaching in every direction. There have been some pearls of wisdom that are powerful today.
And perhaps to the participants, any last nugget of advice you want to drop in the chat before we say goodbye? We're at time. We're at 6:02 or 3. Like I typically say to my students, in the virtual space, if you need to go, please, of course. Thank you for being here. But before we say goodbye, do you have any, if you want to drop any sort of words of wisdom, any other takeaways in the chat box? Now is the time before we say goodbye.
Just want to thank people for speaking, because it was nourishing. I felt, you know how when you go to the carnival and you get in those rides that make you dizzy when you get off? That's what, but after a while you kind of get right. And that's kind of how I felt. I hear people saying some of the things I've been suspecting, but your articulating them has kind of reset my gyroscope. So thank you. I was nourished by the exchange. I really was. Even from the people that didn't say anything but who typed something, I appreciate that too.
Mm-hmm. How about the any of the panelists who would like to say one last word, one last thing? I know Jorge made a pitch for Near Futurist. I think I lived there when Chloe and I were colleagues at Northwestern. I think there must be a cot somewhere in the back of Near Futurist where I lived.
There is. I want to confirm. It says Mario on it. I know, for fact. Yeah.
Jorge, you wanted to say one last thing?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for engaging in this conversation, and that absolutely take care of yourselves. We'll be together again in some way, shape, or form. I have no doubt.
Quenna?
Again, just huge gratitude to all of the attendees and the panelists. I am having a little bit of imposter syndrome up here, but appreciate you all and for being able to share space with y'all.
Nina, Chloe, Coya, and Cheryl, we heard from you, but of course, chime in.
Just thank you for having me. It was very nourishing to have these conversations. I want to connect with all of you and see the work that you're working on and the work that you're producing. Please find me on social media. It's Nina Danger on literally everything. So please connect with me.
I'm just so grateful to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time, and to our participants. I think it's so easy to talk about Zoom fatigue or everything that's not good. But it's also human connection is always, I think, a beautiful thing. And so I feel really re-energized actually after this conversation. So thank you all for creating that.
So we will be having more panels sponsored by the Humanities. We'll our working group will continue, and so we'll keep you all on our mailing list and let you know about further talks. And send us invitations to your talks, and we'll help spread the word in the community. And check out UIC, what we're doing here in the School of Theater and Music. If you don't know it well, there's a lot of amazing people making incredible work.
Awesome. So yes, thank you to Chloe, Coya, Quenna, Jorge, Nina, Cheryl. I don't think am I missing anyone? No. Christine and all of you participants for being here with us today. As Christine proposed, like follow us. We'll send you more information about our next gathering. And until then, really, I mean, what I say is like be well, and figure out how to be well, in the midst of these disorienting times. And thank you very much. What I'll do is that I'll leave the chat room open, and like at the theater lobby post show, you sort of stream out and you talk. So I'll leave it open. The session is officially over, but we can still chat among ourselves as we sort of go about the rest of our evening. Thank you very much.